Hello world, I'm Johnyliltoe, and we are playing more of A Dark Secret. Last we left off, we had killed off 2 of the teachers of an unspecified number. I believe we're going on to a 3rd. Don't think we're at the parents yet. That should be good. Another day, another task ahead. This time there was no long break for Shiria in between her 2 assignments. Obviously, she was the one putting herself through the rather tight schedule, but it was the impatience that lured inside of her to get through to her parents that drove her onward so quickly. She was actually looking forward to the next job, though. It concerned one of the teachers that barely had any family. He still lived with his parents, who nourished him and clean up after him as if he was a baby still. It would be pleasurable to inflict pain upon them in order to make him feel it through their screams. The pure thought of it made her smile. She knew his habits. She had visited him before. Back then it had been for his pleasure. Now she would visit him for her own. He would suffer, for he had brought misery upon her. There was absolutely no hesitation or doubt in her mind when she made her way to his house that night. To her surprise, the front door was unlocked. He didn't seem to have expected anyone, neither did his family, if they didn't even put the tiny effort into locking their door. Wouldn't you leave it unlocked if you were expecting someone? Because hopefully you're not expecting someone to come kill you. She was assuming that no one expected a crazy witch like her to break into their house to torture him to death. Exactly. The thought made her chuckle. Actually, yeah, I guess in the case of multiple murders in a relatively short period of time around town, you probably want to lock your door. Quietly, she opened the door and slipped past it, closing and locking it behind her. She wasn't sure it was normal for the house to be locked, but if anyone tried to get in while she was still inside the house, it was certain to buy her some time if she had to abandon that night's quest for her own safety. Once inside, she held on for a moment, enabling the skills that would allow her to coordinate better in this familiar environment. She knew that his parents knew what he was up to, had been up to with her, and it was what he had been up to with her, and was possibly up to with more girls before and after her. They had not helped her or others. They had stood with her son. She could not blame them for that, for it was what she had wished for from her own parents. But she did blame them for wronging her and others by looking away. Their ignorance disgusted her. They would pay for it. They were guilty. Shiria first made her way to his parents' bedroom. It did not take her long to get to them, make them wake up to her powers, and tie them to the walls. Held by invisible strings of power, their ties were unbreakable. They could not escape. The second thing she did was walk into the separate room of the teacher. For a while she just stood in front of his bed, watching him sleep. The sight disturbed her. When she got too angry to keep standing where she was, she lifted her hand, releasing a small burst of energy meant to wake him up and force him on his feet. It did its job, and only a moment later he was faced looking into Shiria's red-eyed face. With a grin, she turned around and forced him to walk back behind her into the room where she held his parents. When her former teacher and his family saw each other in the situation they were in, the first expression on all of their faces was fear. Fear for each other, fear for themselves. For Shiria, it was all the same. She enjoyed it. The more afraid they would be, the more pleasurable for her. She was satisfied when she saw the teacher gasping in despair about his and his parents' pointless situation. I think helpless is more. With a wink of her hand... A wave of her hand? I'm not sure if wink of... It might be. Anyway, I'm just gonna go with a wave of her hand, she forced him on the wall behind her, making him look directly at his parents. She had planned on a long variety of torture set up for his parents and for him, but now when it mattered, Shiria was overwhelmed by old pain and an unbearable anger, which she could not control. Grimacing in anxiety and lust to kill, she turned towards his parents and stared at them, one then the other. It was not her usual blank stare. Instead, it was filled with suppressed emotions and unprocessed trauma. She did not even attempt to tame it. All the forgotten emotions in the hopeless cage of her situation and who she had become were reflected in the outburst of power that happened. Any kind of control she had kept crumbled. The magic within her took over her body, her mind, her deeds. With a single moment, she unleashed an ineffable wave of energy. It built up in a dome around her, expanding with each of her unrhythmic breaths, until finally it burst into millions of red shards. Or million red shards. Yeah. Each of them as big as a human hand. They floated in the air for a second, before turning around to one of the three victims. The moment after, everything was quiet. Shiria closed her eyes. She felt tired. The exhaustion made her tear up. In no way she wanted to see the outcome of her failure. Finally, she realized that she did have to deal with it and leave the place before anyone would notice something strange around the house. She opened her eyes again and looked around from one person to the other. The walls around them had crumbled, in certain places broken. Through newly created holes in the roof, she could see the moonlight shine down upon the dead corpses, each pierced by 1,000 red shards. They stuck in their bodies, nailing them to the cold wooden walls. She smiled. At least they were dead. She had not failed completely. When she heard voices from the outside, she realized it would be best to disappear as soon as she could. Newly embracing her magic with the last bit of energy left inside of her, she regained her night vision and climbed out the back side of the house, through an open window, destroyed by the burst of power. With an insane chuckle, Shiria ran out of the house and into the darkness of the night. The people believed it was a mad magician, and were now alarmed by the magical powers they had seen. After the events of the last night of action, Shiria was very uncertain about how to proceed. She certainly didn't want things to escalate like that time. Stuck between wanting to continue and not wanting things to go wrong again, she was very confused, and as much as she hated to admit it, also frightened. Fear was not on her list of emotions anymore. She knew she was not supposed to feel any of that. After a while of consideration, she decided to take a different step, and take a new approach at her next task. She would aim for an approach of torturing her next victim's mind into insanity before killing him. That way she thought she might be less likely to snap once more. She did not take the time to spy on the person this time. Instead, she just randomly left her mansion to go to the place where she knew... Okay. There was an idea of what to do to make this time different in her head, and that idea she knew she would be able to put into action. The front door to the house was locked, but she could not care less. With her new determination, she stared at the lock, forcing the key stuck from the inside to turn around and unlock the way to her next victim. He lived alone. She approved of that. No distractions could ruin her plan. It took her little effort to find the man firmly asleep in his bed, with a single glaze. She's not a donut. With a single gaze, she forced him on his back, creating invisible ties around his hands, feet, and waist, making it possible for him to move. Wait, what? Creating invisible ties around his hands, feet, and waist, making it possible or impossible? He awoke, gasping in confusion and fear, lifting his head as high as he could to stare directly into Shiria's eyes. Shiria did not hesitate. She looked directly back into his eyes, reaching out her mind towards his. His inexperience flattered her. It was too easy for her to gain entrance into his mind, his heart, and his soul. Just the way the magic had pierced hers. Apparently, he did not even realize what was happening. All he seemed to feel was that something was wrong. His eyes closed when she began to fill his mind with lies. It was her plan, and it seemed to be so much easier than she had thought of. And it seemed to be so much easier than she had thought it would be? Yes. She did not have to make the effort of torturing him. He wasn't worth that much attention. All she needed to do was to imagine scenarios she wanted to put him through in her mind and transfer them to his, ultimately creating the feeling of it being real in his brain. She chuckled at how simple the solution was, and apparently had been from the beginning. She could kill him 100 times, and he would never be able to make her stop until she decided to end his misery with the only thing in that night that would be real, his death. The first time she killed him simply by choking him to death with her bare hands, it satisfied her to be able to watch the impression on his face turn from fear to pain to despair, and then become blank. The second time she killed him, she simply slit his throat, enjoying every moment she could feel the warm blood running over her hands. The third time she killed him, she rammed the knife into his chest, getting it stuck between his bones. She knew it was not a deadly assault. It satisfied her to see him suffer. In his eyes she could see that he thought he was dying. She could feel the despair and the pain he was battling with. At first she had doubted she would get the same satisfaction from this mental torture as she would get from the physical things she experienced the previous times. It was her own reaction to the situation that proved her wrong. It was indeed not the same kind of satisfaction she could gain from this, but it was at least as intense as the feeling she had previously experienced. For a while longer, she took pleasure in killing the one who had tormented her before in any way she could possibly imagine. Then she broke the mental connection and looked down at the sweating and shaking body of her victim. She knew how he felt. She had felt the same confusion, pain, and anxiety before as he did now. It was exactly what he deserved. For that last death, she would make it final, real. She took her knife, sharp as ever, and approached him. Placing her knife on his left shoulder, she whispered into his ears about the death that was about to come. His facial expression did not change anymore. He was already gasping in fear, pain, and confusion. It almost seemed like another death would not make a difference. Frustrated by his indifference, she pushed the knife deep into the man's flesh, bending it towards his arm. Slowly she cut a straight line down his upper and then his lower arm, until she came to a stop at his wrist. The man seemed to be in so much pain, he could not even scream anymore. His face was as pale as Shiria's, and it seemed as if he was already dead, yet still breathing. So, that's the effect of mental torture. Shiria was indeed disappointed. She expected the most pleasure from the final death. Now she had to experience the effects of her doing in her miscalculations. She sighed, then put the knife out of his wrist. Pulled the knife out of his wrist. Grabbing his hand, she held it firmly as she created a deep cut through the veins on his wrist. Then grabbing his other hand, she repeated the same process. She turned away from his face, stopping and stopped looking at him grimacing with pain. Yes. He gave a wince of pain when she lifted his foot and dragged the blade through the tendons at the backs of both feet. Then she watched him bleed to death. Even with death, his face did not change. It remained a bizarre grimace of pain and fear, equal to her facial expression. After the death of her daughter, she smiled. With an insane singing, Shiria ran out of the house and into the darkness of the night. The people believed there was a connection between all these murders of teachers. You think? A man, gagged, tied naked to a chair, fearing for his life. Only source of light, a few candles, casting shadows of fear and ultimately death through the basement. I thought the dungeon was up above. A woman, once scorned, could be heard descending the stairs. She came into view, clothed in a bathrobe, a knife in hand. You know what is nice about gags? She asked, pausing as if waiting for him to say something. I can still hear your screams. She walked over to a candle and started running her blade through the flame. Don't worry, I'm sterilizing it just for you. She kneeled in front of him. You know, she said, running a finger along his inner thigh. You were always so surprised I never screamed. Let's see if you do, shall we? Again she paused as if for an answer, grinned, slowly cutting a deep gash along the top of his thigh. All the while he screamed, she would wave her free hand through the air as if it was conducting a symphony. Standing up, she grabbed one of the candles. Now for a personal touch. She dripped hot wax into his wound, bending down to blow on it. How's the view? She chuckled. She took pleasure in every cut she inflicted. Soon her masterpiece was done. No more torture. Finishing her final incision. All over. She made it sound as if she had just bandaged a small child's injury. Afraid for his life, tears streaming down his face, she removed her bathrobe, revealing her scarred body, a mirror of the cuts she had just inflicted. We match, she said as she positioned herself behind the chair. He felt warm steel against his skin, then she kissed the top of his head. Any last words? This time she did not pause for a response. With an insane silence, Shiria ran out of the house and into the darkness of the night. Her parents now knew that it was her. Fair enough assumption. What they did to me was monstrous. Now, I am a monster. Some commit acts on insanity, an attempt to hold what little insanity they have left. Some are insane, the sanest people you may ever meet. Insanity, a way to deal with the insane circumstances. Sanity, the absence of insanity. Most are driven to insanity. Some try to maintain sanity. I was driven to it, and I embraced it. So carefree, no code of conduct, no regard for life, especially your own. Nothing to live for, yet so alive. This is insanity. This is insanity? Spread your wings, it feels great, or clip them and never know. I am not a monster. I just do monstrous things to them. All of this just to prepare for you. Shiria thought of her parents. She was determined that finally she had enough experience to turn towards them. She had not spared anyone. She would not spare them. they were the ones to blame the most. They had not protected her. All she had done before gave her the experience she needed to make her plans and dreams of revenge towards her parents come true, and not make unwanted mistakes which could ultimately kill them too soon. She knew they wanted to live. She knew they wanted to love. She knew they would make them. She knew she would make them. What? I closed my eyes. Covered in this darkness, I felt myself drawn to the music. Dark orb. I opened my eyes. The scenery in front of me had not changed. The orb was still there. The feeling was still there. I gasped in confusion. My breath was weak, equal to the slight breeze of an early summer morning, existent but barely noticeable. I closed my eyes again. It gave me a feeling of safety. The orb, a faintly glowing dark figure in the distance, came closer. I wanted to open my eyes. My muscles failed me and remained closed. My fearful scream echoed unnaturally along in my ears. It remained unheard. If I had reached out my own hand now, I had been able to touch the orb. Whispers from the distance strained my ability to follow the last echoes of my scream. As with a reflex, I slowly lifted my arm to touch the foreign symbol in front of me. When I came close to it, a feeling of deep joy rushed through my body like water down a waterfall. Beautiful. Unstoppable. Immortal. Simultaneously, a great wave of fatigue swamped? Shoot, what's the word? I'm just gonna go. Simultaneously, a great wave of fatigue came over me like the sea on a far shore. Then I touched the orb. The darkness around me increased. Its intensity grew to something enormous, like I had never seen before. I looked at it. I saw it. I drowned in it. A joyful sigh. Now I am home. Ugh. That's uncomfortable. Oh. I guess that's the end. So yes, a visual novel by my good friend Johnyliltoe. Poems by Gisbin. Credits to Ashen Sorrow for the 20 amazing background images provided as stock. Other artwork credits: Alexis, I Must Be Dead. Appropriate. Joachim Olofsson. Vink Black. Resonora 70s stock. In a Design stock. And Indigo Deep. Credits to Brian Stiro for all his amazing background tracks. Other music credits are Zerov, music by Pedro. Vote for Pedro. Oh, and there's the end. I kind of wish I had left it on that music. Oh well. So, that has been A Dark Secret. Actually, let's load something up. Okay. Oh, auto. This one. Yes, we'll end to this. Pretty picture. That has been A Dark Secret. That was heavy. A little bit longer than I expected. I did this all in one take after a long day of work, so I'm a bit tired. But good story. Dark, very dark, kind of sad, very sad. Yeah, But well done. Bravo. Bravo. So, that has been A Dark Secret. I am your host, Johnyliltoe. Thank you for watching. As always, any questions, concerns, queries, conundrums, put them down in the comment section below. If you'd like to see more visual novels, I really don't typically play them, so if you've got recommendations that you would like to see, I'd love to hear them. That'd be cool. If you don't like this sort of thing, let me know. See how it goes? I'll see you next time.